What's up, family? This your favorite cousin Rich back again with Rich Talks, episode 21. And today we're going to talk about the power of vulnerability. Yes, the power of vulnerability. Vulnerability, there's power in being vulnerable? Yes. And that's what we're getting ready to explore. See, a lot of times, people see being vulnerable as a weakness. Oh, you shouldn't be vulnerable, you know? You should be closed off. You should be hard. You shouldn't let people see your emotions. You shouldn't be open. But that's what being vulnerable is being open. It's the ability to be seen, to open up those wounds, to open up those fears, and to really dive deep. See, when you're finally vulnerable, you're available and open to change. When you're finally vulnerable, you're able to see the things that have been holding you back. That's the power of being vulnerable, the power of vulnerability. So we need to redefine vulnerability. It's always had this negative connotation attached to it. Oh, you shouldn't be vulnerable. But how many times have we seen that when we're vulnerable, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position, in a healthy vulnerable position, I should say, it's worked out in our favor. You know? When you're vulnerable talking to someone and you're not sure, but you let these people in, and now you've birthed a new relationship, a new connection. When you're vulnerable about, you're in a job interview and you're vulnerable about letting them really know the true you, authentically, and then boom, you get that job. To me, that's what vulnerability or being vulnerable is all about. Is the willingness to be authentic, authentically you. And sometimes being vulnerable is not just necessarily, about letting people into how you've been hurt in the past or, fears or things of that sort. No. Sometimes being vulnerable is just being you. Sometimes being vulnerable is just you being goofy. You being in the grocery store with your headphones in, and just having a good time. Dancing to the music in the middle of the aisle. That's being vulnerable. Why? Because you're not caring about the judgment that people are going to place upon you. You're authentically being you. You're authentically letting yourself shine. To me, that's what I think about vulnerability. I don't necessarily see it as a weakness. I never see it as a weakness. I see it as a strength. Because when you're vulnerable, to me, it raises your frequency. Like I said, if you're in the grocery store, even if you don't have headphones in, but you're in the grocery store, right? And a song comes on, and you want to dance to it, or you just want to move to it, you want to groove to it, but you don't want to be vulnerable. You don't want to let people see you dance. You don't want to let people see you have a good time. So now you're not letting yourself shine. Now you're not authentically being you. You see? So now your frequency is being shut down even more. Why? Because you're not letting yourself shine. You're not letting yourself do what you truly want. You're holding yourself back. That's why I say being vulnerable can allow you to raise your frequency. You face fears when you're vulnerable. The fear of being hurt. The fear of being judged. All these fears come with being vulnerable. But I say this, if someone takes your vulnerability and uses it as a weapon, that person doesn't deserve to be in your life. See, this is why I say being vulnerable with reason. And when I say being vulnerable with reason, what I mean is you have to be vulnerable and also have boundaries. You have to be vulnerable and also know your self-worth. You know? Meaning you can't just be vulnerable and then let people treat you how they want to treat you. You can't just be vulnerable and, don't stand up for yourself and not have self-love. You can't do that, because now you're going to be taken advantage of. Because when you're vulnerable, you let people in. But if you don't have enough self-love, or if you don't have the ability to set up boundaries, people can see where you're vulnerable at. You shouldn't define the definition with the word, but people can see where your soft areas are and be able to take advantage of you. And now, because they're taking advantage of you, because you don't have boundaries and enough self-love, you allow this ill or toxic treatment to continue. Because like I said, you're vulnerable, you're open. So now they know the key to what is your weakness. You see? So now they have the key to what your weakness is. They use it against you. So that's why I say you have to be able to have boundaries. You have to be able to have proper discernment with who you're being vulnerable to. Don't just be, and when I say vulnerable, I mean open up like deep wounds or talking about past things. I don't necessarily mean being vulnerable as far as dancing, singing, or being yourself, but I'm talking about being vulnerable and opening up. Those type of things, that type of vulnerability. I wish there was two types of vulnerability to make it easier to describe. One just you being yourself, and then one in the aspect of, opening up. I wish there was two different ways to describe it, but sadly, right now, the only one that I know, I'm not going to say that there's the only thing, but the only one I know is just vulnerable, and then how you're being vulnerable. Many of us fear being rejected, judged, ridiculed, hurt. But you don't understand that if you're not vulnerable in starting this relationship, if you're not vulnerable with talking to these friends, if you're not vulnerable with being yourself, if you're not vulnerable with going to these places and, really facing your fears, whether the outcome would be good or whatever the case may be, if you're not vulnerable enough, you're isolating yourself. And isolation can be good for growth, yes, but you're stunting your growth. That thing don't sound too bad. But if you're not vulnerable, you could be isolating yourself. You're closed off. You're not willing to grow. See, I really associate being vulnerable with growth. Vulnerability and growth go hand in hand. Because you can't grow if you're isolated so much. You see? Isolation is good if you're focused. But you got that focus of what you need to focus from being vulnerable. You see? Because you were vulnerable, you saw where your wounds were. You saw where your inadequacies were. You saw where you needed to grow. You saw where you needed more confidence. So now you isolate yourself to do the inner work by yourself. But you shouldn't be in isolation because you're scared to be vulnerable. You see? You see what I'm saying? It's okay to be isolated because you're working on yourself. That's one thing. You shouldn't isolate yourself because you're scared of being vulnerable. There's no growth in that. Again, let me say it. I guess this is the third time now. It's okay to isolate yourself because you're trying to grow. Nothing wrong with that. If you're isolating yourself because you're scared of being vulnerable, meaning you're scared to open up to somebody you start a connection with, so now you close down because you're scared of being vulnerable. You're scared of going out, trying new places, being, new things. You're scared of dancing in public. You're scared of laughing in public. You're scared of just really being you. If you're scared of being vulnerable in those manners, and now you isolate yourself, you run away. That's what you're doing. You're running away. There's no growth in that. When you're running away, you could be running away from a blessing. Let me say it again. When you're running away from being vulnerable, being your true self, or the self that wants to be expressed, you could be running away from a blessing. It could be a girl that likes you or a guy that likes you. But because you're not willing to be vulnerable and smile at them or look them in their face, look them in their eyes or say hello. If you're not willing to be vulnerable, you could be missing out on a blessing. And time again, we miss out on blessings because we're scared of being vulnerable. Side note, it's something about looking at the ocean at night and just listening to the waves. It's something about it. Sometimes you gotta sit back and just thank God for the blessings, even if you're not where you want to be in life. And see, this is me being vulnerable, being able to stop what I'm talking about and really express where I am and being, quote unquote, emotional. Expressing my thanks. That's being vulnerable. But somebody who listens to this, if anybody listens to it or whoever down the line listens to this, they see there's power in being vulnerable because people get to connect to you when you're vulnerable. See, vulnerability leads to connection. When you're vulnerable about where you've been, what you're going through, who you are, you allow people to connect to you. How many times has there been somebody who hasn't been vulnerable where they put this wall up or this facade that they're perfect or they're this or they're that, and we never knew the true them? It was hard for us to connect to them. We couldn't find ourselves in them. But somebody who shared it all, who was open, who let us know them, who didn't hide their flaws, we were able to connect to them even more. Why? Because they were open. We were allowed to see they were human. We were allowed to see their flaws. We were allowed to see their strengths. You gain strength from seeing other people being vulnerable. You gain strength from seeing other people be themselves. That's why I say there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable. There's no weakness in being vulnerable. Actually, that's where strength lies. You have to be strong. Imagine you're with somebody and you're scared to open up. But what you don't realize is you opening up to that person, that strength that it takes for you to open up about whatever's happened in the past, that strength is what allows you to build this relationship even more. It's that glue that's going to hold this relationship together, being vulnerable. Even if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're not talking about something that may have hurt you in the past, but just being vulnerable to be able to talk about where you guys are and how you're building and where you're going. When you're vulnerable in these aspects and you're able to just be real, that, like I said, that's going to be the glue that holds it together. Why? Because you're not scared. You're putting your scaredness in the back and you're saying, I want this to work out even more, so I'm willing to share and shed. I'm willing to share with you how I feel and what I believe, this, in order for this relationship to grow. The power of being vulnerable. Like I said, you may be vulnerable with people. You may open up to people. And they may reject you. That's cool. You learn from it. It's not the end all be all. And people who use it against you, like I said, once you have that proper discernment and you have that love for yourself, Anybody who uses it against you, they don't matter. It won't take as much effect on you because you knew that you were coming out of your strength. Again, I say, anybody who uses your vulnerability against you, they're weak because you used that out of your strength. And now this person is not being vulnerable because of them saying, okay, this person opened up and was vulnerable. Now let me open up and be vulnerable with them. Even in how I treat them. You know, that's why we have this whole, was the city boy, city girl era, where we have people saying they don't want relationships or people don't want commitment. That's why people are scared of commitment. People are scared of commitment because they're scared of being vulnerable. They're scared of being hurt. They're scared of expressing love. See, expressing love comes in being vulnerable. Again, expressing love, whether it be verbally or with actions, forces you to be vulnerable. And people are scared of that. People would rather share their body than tell someone or commit to someone to love them. Because the vulnerability to commit and share that love scares them. This is getting deep. People would rather share their body. With strangers. As a way of life. Not just saying one time or whatever the case may be. I'm saying as a way of life. People would rather share their body than be vulnerable. Vulnerable in a relationship to let love in and let love grow and be open. Now, vulnerability really scares people. Vulnerability really scares people. Being vulnerable is like being naked. You know, it's the exact same thing as being naked. You're open. You can't hide anything. It's like you have to take me as I am. But like I said, the beauty behind that is when someone appreciates your vulnerability, that's like a seed being planted in fertile soil. I'm the type of person I appreciate vulnerability. Because if I'm trying to work on something with you, and now you're vulnerable and you're open with me, now it allows me to see where you may lack something. You see? It allows me to see where, okay, you may be inadequate over here, so I can give you more over here. I can help you out over here. Or I can be easy over here. I can do it. You know, it allows me to cater to someone or cater to a situation when that person is vulnerable. But it's hard to build with somebody who's not vulnerable or build in a situation when someone's not vulnerable because you don't know where they're putting up this mask, you know what I'm saying, where they're really hurt. You know, deep inside they have a wound, but they just put a Band-Aid over it. And now they wear a t-shirt covering it. But you never know, they have this wound that's not really healed. You can't grow with that. That's why I say, being vulnerable or having the ability to be vulnerable is a strength. You look at anything that was successful, anybody who's successful, anybody who's in a successful relationship, anything of that sort, and you ask them about being vulnerable, the power of being vulnerable, they'll tell you. It's one of the greatest things that you can have. Even as a great leader, you have to be vulnerable. It builds trust. You know? Being vulnerable to have the ability to say you made a mistake. That's strength. Having the ability to, like I said, as a leader, to see your weaknesses. To sit down with yourself and have your, see your weaknesses. And either you fix them yourself or you bring other people in, other tools in, other entities in, to where you're weak, they're strong. But if you're not vulnerable with yourself and you're not vulnerable with your team, you're going to fall. Like I said, imagine if you're a CEO of a company, but you're not good with time management. But if you're not honest with yourself about time management, guess what? Everything's going to fall. But if you're honest with yourself, okay, I'm not good with time management. You either work on it or you bring somebody in. Hey, I need to hire you. I'm not good with time management. So I need you to this. You delegate that. Good leaders are either people who are able, who know themselves. The best leaders are people who know themselves. And the best way to know yourself is being vulnerable with yourself. Being open with yourself. And in that, you're able to see, like I said, your weaknesses, and you either work on your weaknesses or you delegate them. Simple as that. That's how the best leaders are made. The best leaders see their weaknesses and say, is this something I'm able to work on? If not, delegate it. Can I draw? No. If not, delegate it. Am I good with time management? No. If not, delegate it. Am I good with communication? No. If not, delegate it. Can I work on this? If so, yes, work on it. If not, delegate it. That's how the best leaders are made. They're open and honest with themselves. They're vulnerable with themselves. And through that, they're able to grow. You can't grow if you don't know where to grow. Simple. How you going to grow if you don't know where to grow? What aspects to grow? It's like a tree that's not growing upright. It's like you're just growing all kinds of ways. Doing whatever you want to do. Versus being, tied to a stake. So it forces you to grow upright. I hope that made sense. Being vulnerable leads to being open to correction. So if the tree is open to being correction, meaning it's tied to the stakes and now it's growing upright, that's being vulnerable. The tree is not open to correction. I hope that makes sense. But like I said, there goes me being vulnerable, me being open, me willing to put an analogy out there, if it makes sense or doesn't make sense, and being okay to laugh it off and saying, if it doesn't make sense to people, cool. If it does make sense to people, cool. But we keep going. See, even that being vulnerable. Like I said, when it comes to leaders, being able to be vulnerable to see where your weaknesses are, your inadequacies are, so you either delegate it or you grow in that concept. It's the same thing with healing. If you're not vulnerable with yourself and open with yourself about something that might have happened in the past, how somebody might have hurt you, things you've gone through in the past, this vulnerability allows you to grow. This vulnerability allows you to heal yourself. Because at the end of it, a lot of times you really see some of it, the things that was done, especially in childhood, was not your fault. But you have to be able to be vulnerable with yourself, to be open with yourself, to dive deep into these things. Sadly, A lot of people are closed off and don't allow this transformation to take place, which sometimes I see is sad because you're holding yourself back. You're holding yourself back from where you could truly go, who you could truly be. You know, somebody hurt you in the past. Open up to yourself about it. Be vulnerable with yourself about it. Was it something that you did? Was it something that they did? Is it something you can take accountability for? You know? Dealing with past hurt, betrayals, all this stuff. That's what allows you to take a step back and analyze it, look at it, and now you gain strength from it. Because you see where you need to strengthen things. You see where you might have been weak. You see where you might have let somebody in too fast and now this. So now when a new situation comes around, you know how to handle it better. Because you were vulnerable with yourself, to open up to yourself, to really see why these things happen. There's healing in being vulnerable. But only if you take the time. Again, only if you take the time to see. And that comes with the wanting to grow, wanting to be open, wanting to have better and not be stuck. You have to want it. You have to not want to be comfortable in what you've been in for so long. That of not having what you truly want, what you truly desire. See, when you're tired of not having what you truly want and what you truly desire, now you're open to being vulnerable because now you're open to yourself to see where change has to occur. You really see, okay, I need to do this. I need to change this. This is holding me back. This. You know, that vulnerability that comes with that shadow work. You know, a lot of times that's what shadow work is the ability to be vulnerable with yourself to see, you know, the things that's happened in the past. Why this happened? Why do you do this? Why this? Why that? The whys of life. When you're able to ask yourself the whys, WHY', the whys. You're able to ask yourself the whys and decipher the whys and come to grips with the whys. That vulnerability that occurs with that strength. And now when you're in that energy, it allows you to grow. And it says it's a lot of powers in being vulnerable. Being vulnerable is not something that we should shy away from or run away from. It's something that we should run towards. There's strength in being vulnerable. Like babies. Haven't you seen babies are vulnerable? They're some of the most vulnerable life forms out here. Babies. They cry when they want to cry. They laugh when they want to laugh. They sleep when they want to sleep. They don't hold anything back. Yet they get it all. You know, think about that. Babies are some of the most vulnerable things that we have out here. Yet they receive it all, right? So maybe we all need to be like babies and be vulnerable. And maybe we'll receive it all. The power of being vulnerable. Hope this helps somebody today. Good talk. I enjoy it. I'm just out here looking at the water, looking at the beach on this cliffside. It's a beautiful view. Very, very beautiful. Just grateful. Appreciative and grateful. I want to thank everybody for listening. It's your favorite cousin. I love y'all. Y'all be safe. Love and blessings.